Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Airing Room, a podcast powered by DampSmart. It's where housing meets health and data drives action. Today, I am joined by the fantastic Ninesh Muthiah. Now, Ninesh, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to join. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we get stuck into the questions, could you explain to our viewers why I've chosen you to be our subject matter expert? A little bit of history about you and your career in housing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in housing for almost a quarter of a century now. I lived in social housing prior to that, and I've been working on innovating services for people in need of housing, and in particular social housing. So the innovation that started my housing career really was something called choice-based lettings, which is jargon for a more transparent and public approach to advertising council properties. So we piloted a big scheme in central London across 5 boroughs, where instead of behind the scenes matching, where a local authority member of staff would say, hey, you've got the property, or, you know, we're inviting you to see a property, and matching people up and effectively giving people no choice, because it was like a 1 or 2 or 3 strikes and you're out situation. We turned that on its head to say, well, look, here are the properties. They're advertised via a website, and we did this in 2001. So it was very early doors in terms of technology and the broader use of tech. So we had to make it accessible to everyone. And let's not forget, the people that we support and service are the poorest in society and the most deficient in terms of access to tech. So we had to make it accessible. And so we created a series of sites or systems to allow people who are on the housing waiting list to apply and request the property, and then have a viewing and get the property of their choice, really. The challenge has been, was, and continues to be the inadequate supply of social housing, which means that what was a choice, a good choice, is now a much more diminished choice, because there are way too many people on the housing waiting list chasing way too few social properties. And I won't even talk about affordable properties, which, you know, in reality are unaffordable to the vast majority of people who need housing. So that's a little bit about my background. Yeah, I've worked in social housing. I've lived in social housing. I moved from a kind of voluntary type career, volunteering work and charity work, more to tech. I did a degree in computer science to get myself up to speed, and then for the last couple of decades really been innovating a series of services for people in housing or applying for social housing.
Fantastic. It's so important, isn't it, that there is that shared process, or, you know, that there's no discrimination between who gets what, and it can be, you know, like it would with the procurement bid for a business going for a tender, for example. You know, these are social houses, and there needs to be a fair approach to it. So completely commend you for the work that you've done, Ninesh. It's really, really impressive.
And just to add, really, what we started in 2001 is more or less a nationwide process now. So almost every borough, not every, but the vast majority of boroughs do use an approach where they advertise public properties, you know, social properties, to the public, or to people who are eligible on their waiting list, and that's the way it's done. So yeah, it was. I'm proud to say I think it was a great success in the end. But the challenge is the lack of housing. But I guess we'll come back to that again maybe later on.
Yes, most likely. So like you said, you've been working in housing for over 2 decades, and you now lead a social enterprise that's at the intersection of housing tech, really. So from the early noughties.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest systematic cause of today's housing crisis, and what's changed most since you first started in the sector?
Yeah, well, I'd say one word, and that is affordability. whatever it might be, whichever type of housing that you're after, it's affordability and availability. And I think the two feed into each other, because the lack of supply means the price just goes up and up and up. So that's the biggest issue. And I would say one of the biggest single causes of the lack of supply and the increase in housing costs has been the closure of social housing, more or less. So from the point of the right to buy in 1979 under Margaret Thatcher till today, there's been a steady decline in the stock held by the public sector of affordable social housing. And social housing is the one type of housing that is truly affordable or close to being affordable. Every other type of housing is unaffordable for the majority of the population. And aligned to that is the failure of the government, society, the market to replace the loss of social housing build with anything else, anything substantial. So if you go back to 1964, you may not believe this, but it was a Conservative Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, who reached the record for their largest number of social housing properties built in a year. I think it was close to 250,000. You can fact check that, but I'm pretty sure it was of that order. So if you can think that that was the scale of house building, social house building that was occurring in those days, which hasn't been replaced. You know, you're in the low thousands now in terms of social house building. And the alternative really is that you've got private sector housing, and you know, the big house builders would rather build units that are profitable and ideally exclusive for, you know, very rich buyers who may live in this country or may live abroad, and treat housing as an asset rather than as a home. So I think that's, I mean, for me, those things are all interlinked. And in the social housing sector, we've been talking about this for decades, really. So it's nothing new. But the problems are just getting worse and worse, and they've not been getting any better. And sadly, I don't see any improvement coming under this current government either.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's really sad. So like yourself, so I was a former social housing tenant, and we were, how long were we tenants? We were tenants for 6 years, and then we were in the position we were able to do right to acquire, and that was our home. So we acquired the property, but because of that that thing that was around it, we weren't allowed to sell for a set amount of years. So it was our home. So that it was an opportunity for us to be able to get onto the property ladder. And my understanding, because my mum also works in social housing, she was in finance, is that the money that we gave the housing association that we bought the house from was ring fenced, that it had to go to build more social housing. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, I think, well, first of all, the council properties that are bought under right to buy or right to acquire are sold at a substantial discount, and I don't believe that the discounted amount is sufficient to replace, but I believe that it's also held in a pot, and a fraction of it is available for use for, you know, reinvestment. But something else has happened along the way as well, which is that the capacity of housing associations and local authorities to build themselves, whether it be through a workforce or knowledge and skills, or access to finance, has also been drained away. So I think that's another factor really that has inhibited the replacement. So I'd say there isn't the money from the sale available to do a, you know, one-for-one replacement of those units that are lost, and there's also not the capacity and the financial tools available to do that either. So I think, you know, this constant reliance on the big builders, I mean, essentially we're just fattening the purses of the big builders every time there is a new housing kind of stimulus, you know, and we're going to see this again shortly, where the government is changing its policy. They're relaxing the requirements on how many social housing units need to be built, as part of a new build program, and I think they're going to drop it from 35% down to 20%. So that makes the building more profitable for the big builders. So they are then incentivized to build more higher cost units and generate more profit. So it's just continuation of the current regime, really, in terms of housing. But yeah.
So the 35 dropping down to 20.
That's not confirmed, by the way. That's the sort of the word on the grapevine. So to be confirmed, but it looks like it's heading in that direction. A dilution of the proportion of affordable units, definitely.
So this is the bit that I want to kind of ask you about. So the affordable units. So is there a difference between an affordable unit being shared ownership and social housing? Would that percentage be that 20 or the 35%? Would it be a blend of social housing and?
Yeah, there are different figures for each. So I think the social housing figure, I don't know what it is likely to be, but that would be a distinct proportion. And then the affordable category, which can be up to 80% of market rent. So as we know, 80% of market rent is still quite very expensive. Now within that mix, the proportion that are shared ownership and how that is structured, I don't know. There's been quite a bit of feedback on the difficulty of some of those shared ownership schemes as well, in terms of how flexible they are, how affordable they are, how you can staircase out of them, kind of thing. So that's a whole another area of complexity for people to deal with as well when they enter those schemes.
Yeah, completely agree. The reason my sister-in-law's entered into one, so it's kind of, it was a way for her to get onto the property ladder. So it's interesting, you see these estates that are going up everywhere. I'm in rural Somerset and I'm 40 years old, and the whole landscape has changed a lot.
Yeah,
my lifespan. Okay, so thinking of my next question, and it kind of goes to Home Connections, so your business or your company. You guys have played a really big role in using technology to improve access to housing. How do you see digital tools changing the relationship between local authorities, housing providers, and the people they serve, especially those at risk of homelessness?
Yeah, I think they're a fantastic opportunity, a fantastic tool to change the balance of power. So when we started, the balance of power was all in the hands of a back office member of staff in the local authority, or as far as the punter was concerned, the council. The council controlled everything, and they told us. And we re-engineered public services in our sphere by saying, here's the information, here's the location of the properties, here are the costs, here's a virtual tour, have a look at it, and you decide if you want to request this property or not. So we put the home seeker in the driving seat and shifted the power balance in their direction. Now, this is quite different from what big tech does, because what big tech is all about is grabbing your data, grabbing your personal information, and selling you stuff that you may or may not need. And we are very much the antithesis of that. So we're a company which offers a share of the ownership in Home Connections to any of our customers. Now, all of our customers are local authorities and housing associations. So the liability is very limited. It's just £1, so it's low risk. But nevertheless, we're a customer-owned company, and we are customer-driven in terms of the end customer, which is, the home seeker or the person in need of housing. So that's one example of how we re-engineered public services. And actually, we won an award, a European award, way back in 2006 or 2005. I went to Porto to collect it. So it was an award for re-engineering public services, and we re-engineered them in favor of the tenant. So our very profound belief is that tech should be for the user, for the customer, and it should be for them to gain control over their lives and over public services. And everything that we've done since we started has been around that. So I'll give you another example. We pioneered virtual tours, and then we introduced virtual reality modeling. So we took some kit from Hollywood studios that they'd use for production of big films and that, and we used it to model housing estates. And we model a housing estate and show, here is the estate as it is, and these are ideas for regeneration and redevelopment. And would you, the tenant, like, you know, to have a garden space, or would you like to have a sports space, or would you like to have some more garage space? Would you, you know, would you like the walkways to be done this way? Would you like the lighting to be here or there? So we deployed those tools to give more choice to tenants on the estate. Yeah, and likewise, you know, whatever we do, currently we're running Street Link, which is a service where if you see someone sleeping rough on the street, you can ask for them to be helped by sending an alert, which is then immediately triaged through to the local authority outreach team, who would then go and try and help them if they can to get housed. You know, we use tech to match people to property. So one of the ways we're doing that is we know that there are parts of the country or parts of the city where there are more properties available, but it's difficult for people to understand that or maybe overcome the barriers to make the move. So we've set up a relocation service called Home Finder UK, and what that does is it matches, it supports people relocate to an area where a property is available, and we'll get some funding for that as well. So we'll try and help to pay for removals and carpets and white goods and all the rest of it. So yeah, we're constantly really about making tech for the person rather than for the man.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And it's so nice to see that power balance shift, you know, and in a really short space of time, you think, what's that? You've done that within 15 years, and that was an archaic system, and we know how hard it is for systems and processes to be changed when people are used to doing things a certain way for a very long time.
Yeah.
So behind every statistic is a person or a family trying to find stability, trying to find a home. What's one story or moment that stayed with you in your career, and something that reminds you of why this work still really matters?
Yeah, I was thinking about the story of a man who's living in private accommodation. He was, you know, relatively late on in life, but still working, needing to work, living in private accommodation, working in a kitchen, in a hotel. So working extremely hard, but finding it really difficult to make ends meet. And because they were living in private rented accommodation, threatened with eviction, approached the council at the end of a waiting list. Difficult to speak to people because, you know, the council's inundated with demand and not enough staff. And not really getting anywhere with their life. So we came into contact with them, and we found that through our home finder scheme, there were some 1-bed properties available, but not in the particular part of London that they lived in. This would be in the southeast towards the coast, but, you know, about 30 or 40 miles away. So we worked with them, talked to them about the option and the opportunity, and the challenges that they'd have to overcome. And over a period of a few weeks, we were able to obtain the property and help them move to get rehoused. And after that, they sent us a letter, a really lovely letter. It was quite heartrending in terms of the kind of personal struggle that they've been going through and the difficulties and challenges they faced, but also it was really moving in terms of the amount of gratitude that they expressed for the work that we did, but gratitude that they oughtn't really to have needed to express, because this shouldn't need to be the case in an advanced industrial economy like Britain. But nevertheless, that story told me so much about how difficult it is for people living in the private rented sector, and the challenges they face with affordability, overcrowding, issues around the quality of the property, perhaps issues around, damp and mold and refurbishment and repairs, and the constant struggle that they have, whether it be dealing with the landlord to get those issues dealt with, or other public services to get support when, in this case, they found that the relationship was breaking down, and they were threatened with eviction through no fault of their own, but mainly through the need of the landlord to, their need to take that action. And yeah, I've got that letter pinned to my wall, really, and as sort of one of many, one of around 2,000 bits of feedback that we've got, where we can see that we've made a real difference and an improvement to someone's life, and that's what keeps us going, really. That's the currency that drives us forward, the positive feedback that we get for the work that we do.
Absolutely. Well, you're completely outcomes focused, aren't you? Like you say, you're about the user, you're about what this should be, which moves on to our big news, which is Home Connections is now the official DampSmart Hub for social housing and local authorities across London.
Yay!
It's such an exciting step forward. So obviously you've been working with us for a while, and you've helped us so much with building what the reporting and stuff needs to look like. But what made this partnership the right fit, and how do you see it helping councils and housing providers tackle damp, mould and poor housing conditions more intelligently?
Yeah, well, many things, really. Many things. So first of all, the simplicity of the tools that are provided from the partnership, from DampSmart, the ease with which they can be used, and the fact that you don't need to download a big user manual or read a long leaflet to work out what it is and how it works and where to put it and all the rest of it. That's so simple and easy to use. So that'll be the first thing I'd say. And then secondly, the information that you get from these devices is crystal clear. So often, I mean, we've experienced it ourselves in our own homes over the years, where you have a problem, and let's say it's some damp that's appearing or some mold that's appearing, and you think, God, where did this come from? What has caused this? And you go through this sort of partly soul searching to think, is it me? Is it the way I live? And then you start getting terrified, thinking, is it the structure of the building? Is it something in the foundations? And so on. And you go through these stages of shock and grief and confusion as to how to tackle this type of problem. And the beauty of these devices is it gives you all the answers very, very quickly. And I think the key thing for me is, like, whether it be for a landlord or a tenant, you can see the cause of the problem and potential remedies, and you can almost see, well, look, these are things that can be done quite easily and quite quickly, and these are more problematic things, and just work through them. And I'd like to see us really working together, where the things that are more difficult to do, and we can do this, the things that are more difficult to do, will get some funding to help people do those things, so that they're not just helpless thinking, well, I've opened the windows a little bit more, but actually there needs to be some major refurbishment, and I've just got no way of doing that and no way of persuading the landlord to do that. So I think we can help overcome some of those bigger issues as well. And lastly, I'd say just working with you guys is fun. You're great to get on with. You're easygoing, and you've got the same ethos as us. You're there to help people, really, and not for your own selfish interests. And you've got lived experience as well in terms of these issues, and you're great scientists. So what more could you want?
I'll say Leonard is a great scientist. I'm the person with the health and social care and social housing experience. So I think we're a perfect partnership with the balance between us. Yeah, we're so excited, Ninesh. You know, it's a really big step forward. You know, we know you've got great relationships with the boroughs and stuff within London. So excited to see how that's going to build. So coming to our final question of our podcast, and it's one that we ask every subject matter expert at the end of your interview, is if you could have an open and honest conversation with anybody about the housing crisis, who would it be and why?
Yeah, this is a good question. And there's no easy answer to this, because I don't think the answer to this problem requires rocket science. And I don't think, neither do I think, that people are unaware of what the answer to the housing crisis in the UK is. There's many, over the years, there's been a lot of advice, and there's been a lot of information out there in terms of what could be done. And we've talked about some of those things already in this meeting. So I think the issue is, I mean, I could think of a lot of people to speak to. So members of the government, maybe the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who holds the purse strings, maybe leaders of the big building companies, the builders. But I think that the challenge really is, who has the courage to solve the problem, to solve the housing crisis. So if we look at Europe, there is a city in Europe which is doing relatively well. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's doing relatively well, or better than many other Western European capitals, and that is Vienna. The reason that Vienna is doing so well is that it has a huge amount of social housing stock that it built a long time ago, and it has retained, and it allows opportunities for people to move across social housing stock, as well as opportunities for people to enter, and as a means of stabilizing and keeping, the rent level across the city at a relatively reasonable level. Now, I may be contradicted in some respects, because I'm sure there's people in Vienna who are having challenges as well. But comparing it to London, and why is that? And it comes down to social housing, and it comes down to a building program. And so I could speak to someone in government, as many people have already, and say, well, look, this is what you need to do. But do they have the courage to challenge the vested interests? And do they have the courage and the appetite to direct resources to such a program? So, I feel I'm dodging the question somewhat, and that's partly because I just feel that if I were to speak to someone in power, they're not going to listen. They're not going to listen because it's not necessarily anything revolutionary that I'm going to put to them. It's fairly common sense, and they can do it, but they need the courage to be able to do it. Maybe what needs to be done is to get hold of a few hundred, a cross section of people who are homeless, rough sleepers, people living in temporary accommodation, people who are private renters. Bring a forum together and put them in front of the power brokers and the powers that be, and let them answer the questions and the challenges that they're facing, and come up with some solution rather than tinkering around the edges. So yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered your question in the way that you wanted me to, but that's my response.
You have given us a perfect solution, though, because we can create this forum and get that voice, because that's what needs to be heard.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a big detachment from reality to what happens in their Houses of Parliament.
And let's not forget, there's a significant proportion of private landlords in Parliament. So there is a landlord lobby there. It may not be an organised, conscious lobby, but there is nevertheless an unconscious lobby there. So
yeah,
it's not a conspiracy theory, by the way, but it's just a fact.
No, it's important. People may not even be aware of that, you know, and I can remember my sister wanted me to read, it was either a book or a project. So she was a photographer and she was doing a piece around when the London Olympics was on. And there was loads of housing that had been built and nobody was living in it. And it was a program, it's called like, it's social housing, not social cleansing. And that statement's kind of stayed with me. And it's like, yeah, it really is. And it's like, why should it be seen as something that's not important? You know, and Ira Bevan said that the welfare state should never have enough for people to be sustained on it, but it's there to hold you for a short amount of time or something along those lines. That it's the same thing when I look back at Ross and I, when we entered into social housing, our family life was very different. But actually having that social landlord, having that housing association, we were able to build. I was able to go to university, we were able to have a family, and then we were able to then purchase that property. And you know, it was such a lovely, I couldn't have asked for a nicer journey. And why is that not available for everybody?
Exactly.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Ninesh. You've been absolutely wonderful.
Welcome, Tamsin. I've enjoyed talking to you. It's been great. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You are welcome. So everybody, if you've enjoyed today's podcast of the Airing Room, please give us a like and subscribe. We'll maybe get Ninesh back to have a conversation with somebody else. We don't know, but stay tuned for more podcasts. Thanks, guys.